conference. The first panel, the theme is functionality. I'm Fiona Hackney. I'm head of research at MMU for MFI. And our first speaker is Professor David Tyler, also one of our professors here at MMU. David's going to be speaking about face masks, what makes them fit for purpose. David's one of our most esteemed professors here. He's headed up many research projects, including EU-funded projects, and particularly recent hacks. He works on, been working most recently on product development, PPE, and sustainability issues affecting apparel. Okay, David, over to you. Thank you.
David, did you want us to show your slides, or do you have them there?
Yes, I do need to know how to do that.
Shall I do it for you, and you just let me know when you want to move, move them forward? Would that be helpful?
Yes, that could be helpful.
Okay, I'll just get them up now. Just 1 second. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Sorry. And that should do it.
Oh, and just to say, while we're getting set up, before David starts, we're going to have 3 20-minute presentations, and then we'll have 20 minutes for Q&A at the end of the session. So if people could just maybe signal in the comments box if they want to ask a question. You don't have to put the question in, but just say if you want to, because I can't always see hands up. That would be great. Okay, thank you.
Can everyone, Fiona and David, can you see the slide?
Yeah.
Yes, that's
great.
great.
Oh, lovely. Okay, just let me know, David, when you want me to move the slide.
Okay, I'll
you can be Chris Whitty.
Now, I've added a supplementary description for this presentation, and that is a journey of exploration. And at the beginning of 2020, I knew very little about face masks, and it became apparent that there are many gaps to our knowledge that have been addressed during the pandemic year. I've put together this presentation to capture my journey towards understanding. So, second slide. This is the advice that is given before lockdown. Last February, the World Health Organization said that persons with respiratory symptoms or those caring for COVID-19 patients at home should receive medical masks. However, for asymptomatic individuals, wearing a mask of any type is not recommended. They warned that wearing masks could create a false sense of security and divert attention from other precautionary measures. England's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, he echoed the WHO advice when he said that wearing a face mask had almost no effect on reducing the risk of contracting the illness. Well, we've come a long way since then. The requirements for wearing masks in public transport, in shops, and some are wanting it for any times we spend outside our homes. So we ask the question, what new information has been gathered to change the advice on wearing masks? Slide 3. So this is where I'm going to, thank you. This is where I'm going to link to some personal experiences with face masks during last year. I was involved early in the year with discussions with a startup company who had realized the limitations of existing pollution masks, wearing commercial products that cycled around London. They were about to launch their improved product, which had a better fit to the face, improved valves to reduce discomfort, filters to achieve the top EU standards, and an easy to unclip visor. The goal was to stop inhaling tiny particles that would adversely affect lung tissues. And this experience made me realize that medical masks are quite different. And some reasons for this will be in my next slide. Pollution masks address fine particle pollution, getting down to really fine particles of 2.5 microns in diameter. Contrast this with bacteria. They have a range of 0.2 to 2 microns. In other words, smaller than the finest particles that are regulated in pollution masks. Viruses are even smaller than bacteria. Coronavirus sizes are in the range 50 to 200 nanometers. That is 0.05 to 0.2 microns, just to give a point of comparison here. The implication is that filters allow viruses to pass through. Notice that the surgical mask is a 3 micron mask, allowing bacteria and viruses to get through. To go finer than that, you have to go to the more expensive and technically more demanding N95 mask and FFP2 mask. They are superior, but although bacteria can be caught, viruses still get through. However, this is not the whole story, because viruses are carried by droplets of moisture and aerosols. And we have to look at this next. Slide 5, please. So droplets come in the range 5 to 10 microns, and they can get caught by the surgical mask filter. Aerosols are less than 5 microns. This is a fairly arbitrary distinction, but that's what they say. And these can get through the filter. Both are exhaling, speaking, coughing, and sneezing. On the right-hand side of this image, of this slide, we've got an experiment with an N95 mask. The wearer coughs and the exhaled air mostly goes through a valve in the mask. The aerosol and the droplets are made visible by the lighting, and the time-lapse images show what happens to the exhaled air. Note the 3-meter line. So in relatively few seconds, it gets 3 meters away. The cough aerosol and droplets spread out during the 25 seconds of the sequence of images. And the implications of this are that in the image on the left-hand side of the slide, an infected person releases aerosols and droplets which reach the two people, reduces the exposure to viral particles. The image below that shows the infected person wearing a mask, with significant reductions of aerosols and droplets reaching others. This is an important image. Masks are not just for preventing the virus reaching uninfected people, but also for reducing the release of viruses from infected persons. Slide 6, please. There have been numerous studies that have confirmed that reductions in aerosols and droplets are achieved by masks. The image shows the increasing release of aerosols when speaking becomes coughing, and again when we sneeze. It also shows that the reductions that are experienced with one layer of cloth, 2 layers of cloth, and the surgical mask. Reductions are significant, to be sure, but even the surgical mask releases some viral aerosols. So we cannot say these masks give complete protection. Nevertheless, they do reduce the viral load experienced by inhaling aerosols. And it's worth noting, available textiles can deliver similar reductions. Slide 7, please. There is a significant limitation of face masks. I came to realize my spectacles misted up. I came to realize that it wasn't just me. Everyone wearing spectacles was reporting the problem. The reason is that exhaled air escapes between the mask and the skin. Moist air breathed out comes and it leads to fogging. If the mask fit is adjusted to reduce the gaps, breathing becomes more difficult. We have to inhale and exhale through the filter, which requires more lung effort. The implication is that aerosols and droplets can enter our lungs without passing through the filter. This reduces the benefit we get from wearing a mask. Slide 8. Slide 8 tells us about PPE as a misnomer for face masks. We've seen that face masks protect people from infected wearers. If I get infected with the virus, my mask slows its spread. Also, we've seen that face masks are not a complete solution. They reduce the spread of viruses carried by droplets and aerosols, and wearers have partial protection from surges of aerosols linked to speaking, coughing, and sneezing. One conclusion we can draw is that face masks should be seen as community protective equipment, CPE, rather than PPE, personal protective equipment. An emphasis on the personal does not do justice to the function of masks. And it's interesting to recall an incident in April 2020 when Boohoo produced a fashion mask with the words, "If you can read this, you're too close." At the time, there was a critical shortage of face masks in hospitals, and Boohoo was castigated for this fashion mask. They thought it was bad taste and because they were not designed for protection. Well, at that time, when masks were seen as important PPE, there is some merit in the objections. But now we could say that even fashion masks would have some benefits. Next slide, please. I want to say a little bit about face shields, as these have grown in popularity. A shield has gaps between the skin and the shield. It doesn't even pretend to be close to the skin. The slide shows a simulation of a face shield wearer exposed to a patient's sneeze from the front. The high velocity flow created by sneezing or coughing generates vortex ring structures which become unstable and deform in 3 dimensions. The researchers reported that over 4% of the particles carried by these vortex rings can reach the vicinity of the wearer's nose in half a second. So it gets behind the screen. Face shields can reduce the effects of aerosols and droplets due to speaking, coughing and sneezing, but do nothing to reduce background aerosol exposure. So this is a very significant development. And you know, it shows that face shields are more limited than the face masks. Next slide, please. This is my last slide, and I wanted to, we have been involved in trying to get some projects off the ground with improving the performance of face masks. So we got involved with collaborators. We wanted to develop an antiviral material that would mean that the material itself would kill the viruses quickly. And we thought we would get that with the use of nano copper. This material could be then laundered. Masks could be reused and saving an awful lot of discarding masks after they've had a use. We wanted to enhance breathability, so you could breathe through the filter without too much effort. And we wanted to enhance fit without being too tight on the face. So these were aspects of what we were doing. And the heart of it was the copper nanoparticles embedded in the surface of textile fibers. But as we were doing this, it became obvious that there were lots of commercial products out there that were using copper. Only one that was using nanocopper, but lots of them had copper, and all the logos that you can see on the screen indicates the competition that we had. And I'm afraid we didn't get the bid. It's where commercial interest can often work much quicker than setting up an academic project. So last slide is thanking you for your attention and just giving you a few details of who I am. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, David. I'm perfectly to time as well. That's wonderful. Thank you. So please hold your questions for David, and after the second 2 speakers, we'll have a Q&A session. So to move on to our next 2 speakers, so we've got a double-handed one here. It's the topic is disposable face masks, considerations for socially and environmentally sustainable use. And the speakers are Doris, Domoszlai-Lantner, sorry about that, Doris, and Sara, Emilia, Bernat. Together they're co-founders of Fashion Forward, which sounds fascinating, and please do, they put the details on the abstract, so do follow up on that, which is a think tank founded last year to challenge the conventional discourse around the fashion system. Both are American-based, New York-based, and Doris is a fashion historian, whereas Sara is a sociologist. Over to you.
I'm hoping you're able to share your screen, are you? Are you able to do that okay?
Yes.
Fabulous.
Look. Here we go. It's just loading. Is everyone able to see that?
Yeah, looks great. Are you able to make it a little bit bigger for us?
Let's see.
Oh, that's perfect.
Oh. Okay. Is that good?
Yeah, it might be cutting it off a bit on the left-hand side. I'm not sure.
Right. And
that's much better. That's
there
perfect.
We go. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Doris. I am the one half of Fashion Forward. And so I'll just get right into it. So our theme is disposable face masks, considerations for socially, environmentally sustainable use. Although scientists experimented with the use of face masks in the late 19th century, they were not regularly used for medical procedures until the 1910s. These early medical masks were made of washable, woven textiles such as gauze. In 1955, Time magazine extolled the virtues of throwaway living, a new standard of culture in which ease of disposal reigned large. This was the advent of the age of plastics, in which man-made materials became a regular part of life. Household items such as Tupperware and textiles such as Lycra in the garment and fashion industries. These plastics inevitably made their way into the medical industry as well. Since the 1960s, disposable face masks made of non-woven synthetic fabric have been a standard component of personal protective gear, or PPE, in medicine. Along with syringes, needles, and other medical tools, these face masks are intended to be single-use items, which are not only supposedly easier to clean up and dispose of, but were thought to be more sterile as well. The standard disposable mask, called a surgical face mask, is defined by the United States Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, as, quote, a loose-fitting disposable device that creates a physical barrier between the mouth and nose of the wearer and potential contaminants in the immediate environment. They also define one of the most well-known surgical masks, the N95, as, quote, a respiratory protective device designed to achieve a very close facial fit and very efficient filtration of airborne particles. The edges of the respirator are designed to form a seal around the nose and mouth. Aside from their medical use, disposable surgical masks have been widely promoted in the public sphere. In 2020, they were at the front lines in the effort to curb the spread of the deadly COVID-19 coronavirus. With alarmingly rapid spread of the coronavirus, over 50 countries had mandated the compulsory use of face masks, increasing both the demand and supply of disposable masks. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development estimated that global sales of disposable face masks would climb from $800 million in 2019 to over $166 billion in 2020. Due to concerns around the growth of bacteria on these masks, organizations such as the FDA recommend them to be worn only once before throwing them out. The widespread use of these single-use masks has implications not only for the medical world, but also for the general public, touching upon discourse that includes sustainable production and consumption practices as well. In order to gain a full understanding of the impact of the disposable mask, we must start by discussing the production process. As the COVID-19 pandemic worsened, the global economy increasingly suffered. As the usual demand for fashion decreased, many laborers were either laid off or, in some cases, transitioned to mask manufacturing. An investigation by the Los Angeles Times in April 2020 revealed the conditions that many of those who had transitioned in production faced in a seemingly unlikely place, the United States. Factory owners in Los Angeles, home to America's largest garment districts, or one of America's largest garment districts, employ many garment workers who do not have legal immigration status. They are therefore ineligible for social benefits including unemployment insurance should they lose their jobs. An already vulnerable and highly marginalized group whose work is severely underregulated, garment workers were now obliged to endure harsh working conditions that have only been exacerbated during the pandemic. Substandard pay, or even the complete withholding of pay, otherwise known as wage theft, is just one of these pressing issues facing garment workers today. As stated in the LA Times, quote, "The industry's reliance on subcontracting, combined with state law that makes it difficult to hold retailers accountable, has left regulators playing wage theft whack-a-mole. Small factories under investigation can shut down and reopen during a different name overnight, both to avoid fines and present clients with a clean record," unquote. During the pandemic, it has been even easier for companies to escape punishment for deceitful practices such as this due to closures in regulatory agencies and government organizations. Thus, with few or no direct consequences for factories breaking the law and a lack of legal satisfactory options for garment workers, the need for masks has become a cause of heightened socioeconomic vulnerability. Forced labor is yet another issue that is now linked to surgical mask production. Although there have been reports on the persecution on the Muslim Uyghur minority in China over the past few years, their situation was highlighted in 2020 as a result of investigations into the supply of cotton, as well as masks originating from their home region of Xinjiang. The most recent investigation, conducted by the Center for Global Policy, indicated that more than 20% of the world's cotton originates in Xinjiang, and moreover, under coercive conditions. Under the guise of humanitarian programming, such as education and job training, the Chinese government forces Uyghur men and women to take factory jobs, especially in the textile and garment industries. Although medical gear that falls into these categories was produced in the region in the past, the COVID-19 pandemic gave rise to an increase in forced labor that included the production of surgical masks. In April 2020, a report in the New York Times declared that, quote, "According to China's National Medical Products Administration, only 4 companies in Xinjiang produced medical-grade protective equipment before the pandemic. As of June 30th, that number was 51. After reviewing state media reports and public records, the Times found that at least 17 of those companies participate in the labor transfer program." And what about the environmental impact? The majority of surgical masks, including N95s, are made out of non-biodegradable materials. As such, they pose grave consequences to the environment as well as our own well-being in the long run. The presence and effects of large-scale pollution are arguably the most crucial of these issues, and something that the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly intensified. As a result of the pandemic, hospitals have been producing substantially more medical waste than ever before. For example, institutions in Wuhan, China, where the virus was believed to have originated, quote, "produced an average of 240 metric tons of medical waste per day during the outbreak, compared to their previous average of fewer than 50 tons. Aside from increased use in the medical community, the public has been using PPE, including disposable surgical masks, in record numbers. According to research conducted by the faculty at Monash University in Clayton, Australia, if the global population adheres to a standard of 1 disposable face mask per day after lockdowns, the pandemic could result in a monthly global consumption and waste of 129 billion face masks. Unfortunately, these startling numbers do not necessarily correlate with the amount of materials that is being properly disposed of, or in other words, recycled. Safe disposal is globally, systemically neglected. As the United States reports, our United Nations reports, quote, if historical data is a reliable indicator, it can be expected that around 75% of the used masks, as well as other pandemic-related waste, will end up in landfills or floating in the seas. Given that most of these items can take up to 450 years to compost in landfills and oceans, there is an incredible urgency to explore their impact, both socially and environmentally. Once an item like a surgical face mask is introduced into the larger environment, its chances of interfering with the natural life cycles of humans, animals, and plants are quite high. Animals cannot always tell the difference between organic and non-organic materials. This can either lead them to choking, or even worse, ingesting waste that they perceive to be food, filling up their stomachs with items that carry no nutritional value and can end up blocking their digestive systems. If they're not wholly ingested, items such as surgical masks can deteriorate, causing microplastics to enter and blend into the food chain systems, which can also block gastrointestinal tracts of organisms, exposing them to potent levels of toxins that will eventually poison them. In a shocking new study, scientists in Italy discovered the presence of microplastics in the placentas of unborn babies, indicating that they are essentially being born, quote, pre-polluted. As the UN Environmental Program indicates, not only does this pollution directly impact the health and survival of human beings and wildlife, it also poses other indirect threats to our planet, including additional financial burdens on tourism, segments of our food supply, including fisheries. The surge in the use of disposable surgical masks has only heightened these issues and more. Incorrect waste management techniques also include incineration. In 2020, the United Nations specifically warned against the open burning or uncontrolled incineration of masks, quote, leading to the release of toxins in the environment and to secondary transmission of diseases to humans. A study on biomedical waste in Bangladesh indicates that this hazard could be largely eliminated if the general population were more familiar with the impact of mixing and disposing of household and medical waste together. Burning masks also has another major negative effect. Quote, the majority of surgery and beauty masks and their packaging are made of fossil-derived polymers, the recycling of which is difficult, being not separately collected and sorted, increasing greenhouse gas emissions that from around 0.8 billion tons in 2009 will probably be 2.8 billion tons by 2050. Unfortunately, disposable masks are mostly made out of polypropylene, or PP, a material unlikely to be recycled in large quantities. According to clean technology publication AZO Clean Tech, as of 2012, only about 1% of polypropylene was recycled worldwide. Although it is still a niche initiative, there are some companies that gather and recycle PP. The social enterprise company TerraCycle sells zero-waste boxes and pallets in which customers can collect and recycle disposable masks and gloves. Once the boxes are filled, their contents are separated into categories based on their materials and melted into recycled pellets, ready to be shipped back to third-party manufacturers producing things such as outdoor furniture. In 2019, PureCycle Technologies debuted a new method of recycling polypropylene that was developed by scientists at the multinational consumer goods conglomerate Procter & Gamble. Whereas older methods of recycling PP, including those used by TerraCycle, left the material with strong odors and in colors that were undesirable by most potential corporate buyers, P&G's new technology allows recycling plants to process it to produce clear, odorless, non-toxic pellets, which can then be turned into other products such as bottles. In an ideal setting, disposable masks would be collected and this new technology utilized to recycle the massive amounts of polypropylene in them, ending their designation as single-use items and bringing them into a closed-loop system. However, from logistical considerations, including the actual gathering of so many masks, this technology seems to be limited to the time being to PureCycle, Procter & Gamble, and those who can afford to license it from the latter. And with that, I will turn it over to Sara, who will discuss alternatives. Sara?
Hi, yes, I am seamlessly opening my presentation part. Can anyone see? So after all this, we must ask, are there alternatives to disposable medical masks? Instead of buying masks that they must throw out just after one use, consumers have also the option of buying masks that are composed of two parts. One, a long-lasting textile outer layer, and two, an insertable disposable inner filter. One example is the mask made by the UK-based company Thyra. The outer layer is made out of Occupational, a company regenerated nylon created from ocean and landfill waste, such as fabric scraps and fishing nets, while the inner features of a removable N95 filter. Developed in 2011 by Italian textiles company Aquafil, the technology used to create Occupational reduces the harmful environmental impacts that production of nylon entails. Thyra's mask not only utilizes this earth-conscious variant of nylon, but it also serves as an instrument for protection against COVID-19 and other airborne illnesses by being reusable and cleanable. Given that the filter in such two-layer masks, such as Thyra, is smaller than the size of disposable medical mask, they help to reduce the amount of PP or polypropylene that is produced and later rather unceremoniously thrown away. Nevertheless, these masks still contribute to the large amount of PP being produced globally. Additionally, companies such as Thyra do not provide adequate or really any guidance on how to properly dispose of the filter component after they have been used. Another promising innovation in the quest for greater sustainability in PPE was the 2020 research and development of a reusable, rechargeable anti-COVID mask that meets N95 classification standards. Scientists Jeff Urban and Peter Hosman of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory developed a 3D printed silicone mask base, which features a mesh wire filter that can be removed and electronically charged between uses. The wire itself holds an electrostatic charge that traps and neutralizes virus particles. Hosman explains that the project's long-term goal is, by noting the ultimate vision, is to make masks with a filter battery cartridge that you can plug in and recharge overnight, just like a cell phone. A similarly electronic solution was developed by Swiss company Osmotex. As its name implies, Osmotex manufactures osmosis textiles, which have an antiviral and antibacterial surface that is created through the process of osmosis, or quote, the spontaneous movement of solvent molecules through a semi-permeable membrane from a lower concentration solution to a higher concentration solution, end quote. The company's mask features a small control box that can be attached to the wearer's clothing. When turned on, the electric current generates a process of osmosis, killing 99.999% of viruses and 100% of bacteria within just minutes. Should they be produced and distributed on the mass market, both of these masks have the potential to drastically upend the serious environmental harm caused by single-use masks. There are also several initiatives investigating the use of organic and biodegradable materials in the production of disposable masks. These potential solutions include the use of materials such as cotton, silk, bamboo, hemp, and even organic waste. For example, Queensland University of Technology has created a material made of sugarcane bagasse pulp and other agricultural waste that has the capacity to remove particles the size of viruses smaller than 100 nanometers. They hope to use this material to construct breathable, biodegradable masks. Meanwhile, at the University of British Columbia, researchers has created a mask that can be produced from locally grown wood fibers, as well as locally manufactured. Not only is the Canadian mask, or CAN mask, compostable and fully biodegradable, it also meets the guidelines for N95 classification, making it one of the most environmentally sustainable potential options that are not yet on the market. While the CAN mask is not yet fully ready for mass consumption, a sustainable option from the Philippines is. Sally Handmade Products Industries Inc. has created a mask from abacan, an indigenous tree whose fibers are strong as that of polyester, but unlike its rival, it's fully biodegradable. The Philippines Department of Science and Technology tested the abacan masks and found them to be significantly more water repellent and disposable N95 surgical masks, demonstrating that they offer a high degree of protection from airborne diseases such as COVID, which can be passed on in saliva droplets in the air. Meanwhile, in Europe, hand-based masks have gone into production by French company Geographies. Strongly opinionated, the company's founding president, Frédéric Lourdes, has proclaimed that it's years in not to ban polyethylene products, materials that are shipped to all corners of the world. Use the agricultural materials. This natural product will go back into the soil, end quote. Sorry. Over the last century, medical masks have gone through a significant transformation in the public eye. First celebrated for their novelty, then their one-use sterility, and finally for being widely available instrument for human protection during the COVID-19 pandemic. Nevertheless, most recently, disposable masks were also targeted in academic and public discourse for their role of human and environmental exploitation. Despite being thought as merely functional objects, medical masks provide a lens into material culture and consequently to the social reality in which they are conceived and utilized. They shed light on human behaviors, vulnerabilities, considerations, and not at least priorities. The production, consumption, and post-consumption of surgical masks today leave room for improvement, both in social and environmental standpoints. Studies prove that initiatives embracing more sustainable approaches to these pieces exist, but they remain relegated to niche markets. Adopting these niche technologies to a wider market is vital, not only from a medical standpoint, but to establish a more inclusive, conscientious society and culture altogether. Thank you very much for your attention. We are quite active on social media, so if you'd like to know more about the sustainability of masks, feel free to check out any of our pages, and thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, both. That was great. And remember, everyone, hold your questions. We'll have time. We've gone slightly over there, but so I'll have to cut down the Q&A at the end, but a little bit, but there'll still be plenty of time to ask questions. So thank you both. Right, moving on to the next speaker now. We've got Caroline Elenowitz-Hess from Parsons School of Design, who is going to be moving us to history now. and speaking about medical masks and flu veils, balancing safety and fashion during the 1918 pandemic. Thank you, Caroline.
Sorry, trying to share for a second. Okay, thank you so much for having me. My talk today is called Medical Masks and Flu Veils, Balancing Safety and Fashion During the 1918 Pandemic. Frequently overlooked between the narratives of the First World War and the Roaring '20s, the 1918 influenza pandemic, often called the Spanish flu, has resurfaced as an area of keen public interest given the parallels to our ongoing COVID-19 crisis. As during the current pandemic, protective clothing, particularly masks, became a center of public attention and a visual signature of the crisis. The most commonly used face covering during the pandemic was the medical mask, but the American fashion industry also attempted to introduce their own hybrid product, the flu veil. Veils were already seen as protective, especially when worn for activities such as driving, so the popularity of veils at this moment in time may have reflected the atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. Simultaneously, the mask and veil's roles as the most visible fashions of the pandemic made them a target for cartoonists, who mocked the public's mixed compliance with public safety measures while also devaluing the mask by suggesting that it was no more than a passing fashion or fad. As quickly as the fashion industry rushed to create a fashionable alternative to address the epidemic, this treatment of the mask, as fleeting as a fashion trend, parallels the memory of a world event that has managed in many ways to fade from history. Historians have characterized the Spanish flu pandemic as one of the great forgotten episodes of American history, even though as many as 1/3 of humans across the globe and over 1/4 of Americans were estimated to have been infected by the influenza. Known as the Spanish flu, despite the fact that its origins were unlikely to have been in Spain, the influenza pandemic was first detected at an army base in Kansas, which is shown here, then traveled to the battlefield in France and Belgium towards the end of the war, and spread around the world following the return of demobilized soldiers. This meant that even as the Allied forces of France, Great Britain, and the United States were celebrating their hard-fought victory following armistice in November 1918, the deadly influenza pandemic was raging, making the American government's inability to control the spread a problematic counter-narrative to the patriotic festivities associated with victory. A particularly notable element of this pandemic was the population it affected. While most epidemics have a mortality rate that is highest amongst the very young and the very old, this pandemic had a significant death rate amongst those ages 20 to 40, who accounted for about 50% of the United States pandemic deaths. You can see that here in the chart on this slide. Despite the impact on this demographic, which lowered the average American life expectancy by 12 years, and the large number of deaths worldwide, the pandemic has not been given as much attention as concurrent world events. As historian Nancy K. Bristow has explained, to remember the pandemic would have required Americans to accept a narrative of vulnerability and weakness that contradicted their fundamental understanding of themselves and their country's history. Although we'll see how apparel companies pushed veils, the surgical mask was the standard face covering used to prevent the spread of the disease. The first masks to prevent infection during surgery had been introduced in Germany in the 1890s, and over the next 2 decades, surgical masks spread and used across Europe and the United States to reduce patient infection. Research by Johann von Mikuláš-Radecki and Karl Fluge showed that germs could spread through the noses and mouths of surgeons to their patients, leading Mikuláš-Radecki to start wearing a Mundbind, or mouth tie, which he first published about in 1897. Pioneer of occupational health Alice Hamilton, pictured here, did a study in 1904 of doctors and scarlet fever patients at the Memorial Institute for Infectious Diseases in Chicago. Her study showed that there was a spread of streptococci to patients by asymptomatic surgeons and doctors, leading her to conclude that surgeons and nurses should have their mouths protected during the time of an operation. This image here is one that was published in her study. Her colleague, George Weaver, physician in charge of the Durand Hospital, was the first to see the utility as a method to protect healthcare workers from patients as well. It wasn't until 1916, however, that he made it a mandatory policy that nurses and doctors wear masks when dealing with patients with infectious diseases. Only a few years later, when the pandemic hit in 1918, the use of masks became widespread, such that doctors, nurses, public health officials, and all those who were dealing with the sick were wearing masks regularly. By October 22, 1918, San Francisco had instated the Mask Ordinance that mandated mask wearing for all citizens who appeared in public to be worn at all times except when eating. Many large cities and towns followed suit. Images from across the country show the adoption of the mask in social situations, including an open-air church service in San Francisco and friends posing with a motorcycle in Seattle. Available documentary photographs of people covering their faces during the pandemic shows a predominance of the medical mask over unique fashionable alternatives. However, there is some evidence of concern for fashion, as well as variation in mask and veil wearing. Several examples of influenza masks were illustrated in Women's Wear Daily, exhibiting options that would purportedly combine style and safety. A report in October 1918 presented one design featuring a hat covered with a veil made of mesh and chiffon. This is the safety first veil, shown here. The accompanying text repeats the adage, "It's an ill wind that blows no one good," in order to say that, despite the challenges of the pandemic, manufacturers of veils had been given an opportunity to increase sales. An advertisement for Dr. Bruce's medicated veil, manufactured by Van Raalte, shows another example of the hybrid mask veil, serving both fashion and health. In this image, the upper half of the face is covered by a large-scale netting, while the lower half of the face is concealed by opaque fabric that resembles the medical mask. The text boasts that the fabric is medicated with a colorless, odorless, antiseptic solution formulated by Dr. Bruce, stressing its therapeutic properties. In October 1918, the Seattle Daily Times reported, "Influenza veils set new fashion." The author appeared skeptical of the veil's usefulness, calling it a precaution or fad, but highlighted the large number of veils that Seattle women were acquiring. The New York Times confirmed that sales of veils had increased due to a belief that they would inhibit the spread of the pandemic, and were even being featured very extensively for Christmas gifts. The Cleveland Press warned, "Don't flee, it's flu veil," on their women's page in November 1919, including a photograph that resembles the style of Dr. Bruce's medicated veil. I show them both here so you can compare. They assure readers, "It looks like a holdup, but it's only a flip flu fashion," reinforcing the connection between protective wear and style. Despite the seriousness of the pandemic at the time, the paper chose to take a lighthearted approach that is typically more linked to fashion than to crisis. Cartoons, in particular, caricatured the variety of attitudes to masks. This illustration for a humorous article about mask styles from the Seattle Clarion Ledger shows masks worn in different ways, one half covering the face, one with a hole in it to allow a pipe through it, and one that says, "To hell with the Kaiser." The article describes the many and weird ways of wearing influenza masks, highlighting the addition of embroidery and trimmings. A cartoon from Brigham Young University's campus newspaper, The White and Blue, further linked fashion and mask wearing by drawing a fashion plate of imagined mask styles, calling it "Advanced Styles in Masks, Paris." Each image shows a mask style appropriate to a certain type of person, including a question mark-shaped mask called the Professor's Special, made of purple velvet with piping of gold. Through these images, the mask is shown to be an attractive target for commentary, not only because it is a visible symbol of the crisis, but also because of similarities to a fad of fashionable dress. Despite the image of the flu veil visible in Women's Wear Daily and reports of the trend in other newspapers, fashion magazines Vogue and Harper's Bazaar failed to explicitly mention or illustrate influenza masks or veils. Although both magazines do mention the pandemic, neither gives it much focus as a significant world event affecting its readership. Although it might seem unsurprising that fashion magazines would not focus heavily on such a serious topic, the contrast between the treatment of World War I and the influenza pandemic makes the comparative lack of attention to the pandemic striking. About 116,000 American soldiers died during the First World War between the United States' entry into the war in 1917 and Armistice Day in 1918. In comparison, about 675,000 Americans were killed due to the influenza pandemic between 1918 and 1920, nearly 6 times as many who had died at war. And yet, for American fashion magazines, the war merited frequent mention, with Vogue including a column called Dressing on a War Income, appearing in every issue from February 1918 to June 1919. The magazine never mentions the term Spanish flu, and only 9 articles between 1918 and 1924 mention the word influenza at all, with 5 using the French term grippe. Harper's Bazaar has a similar reticence about the flu. It mentions the term influenza a mere 18 times, often in their short fiction editions, grippe thrice, and Spanish flu on 4 occasions. The issue of class may have been one reason that the fashion magazines were loath to engage directly with the pandemic as a national crisis. Although some scientific literature has claimed that the pandemic impacted all classes equally, recent studies suggest there was a socioeconomic divide in the way in which the influenza infected the population, including an increased mortality rate among the poor. The few mentions of the influenza in Harper's Bazaar and Vogue throughout the pandemic portray a belief that its worst effects were felt primarily by the working classes, while the affluent or middle-class reader of the magazine might suffer from minor discomfort and social impact. The position of influenza as a working-class concern is made explicit in an article from Vogue in January 1919, celebrating new Parisian fashions while lamenting the challenges facing the couturiers. Quote, "We are already doing all we can. In spite of the influenza, which has cut the existing working force in 2, and the strike of the midinettes, which has caused the already distracted dressmakers so much trouble, women are appearing as if by magic in fresh and pretty costumes every day." Despite the global loss of life caused by the pandemic, Vogue approaches influenza primarily as an inconvenience to the fashion designer and the fashionable woman in need of new clothes. The unsympathetic portrayal of the workers' strike further undercuts identification with the workforce felled by the virus. The few allusions to the pandemic chiefly center around the impact that social distancing recommendations and closures had on social behavior among the elite in Paris and in the United States. The intertwining of fashion and society is evident in the recommendations for how to dress when spending much of the time at home. In November 1918, Vogue wrote, "When the grippe keeps us in the house now, we shall find ourselves face to face with the most prosaic of realities, and the chief one against which we all shall have to struggle is the cold." Despite the apparent universality of this concern, the author's recommendations for fur and philosophy offer a vision of fighting the cold only available to the wealthy. Harper's Bazaar writer Stuart Van Kampen described how Parisian women were returning home following armistice, saying, "The Parisienne has returned to Paris in order, apparently, that she may have the Spanish flu comfortably at home." This flippant approach reinforces the fashion magazine's perspective that, if acknowledged, the influenza ought to be treated as an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. In January 1919, Harper's Bazaar does mention a dramatic mortality rate associated with the influenza, in reference to the rate of plays closing. Notwithstanding the lack of explicit allusion to the flu veil or other prophylactic headwear in Vogue or Harper's Bazaar, veils do appear as a notable trend in the winter of 1918-1919, following the first wave of the pandemic. Although in December 1918, Van Kampen reports that veils are not worn much at present in Paris, in March 1919, an illustration of fashion along Fifth Avenue shows all of the women wearing sheer veils around their faces. An article in Vogue on notable fashions available in the shops also features several examples of face veils. These images suggest that the fashion may have been influenced by emphasis on face covering to protect the wearer against the virus, even if these practical motivations were not highlighted for the reader. In the wider media, the mask became the visual signature of the pandemic in 1918. Concern about the mask's effectiveness, comfort, and stylishness was expressed broadly, then as now. There was also similar apprehension and protest over mask requirements as a violation of civil liberties, including San Francisco's Anti-Mask League. After San Francisco instated their mask ordinance in October 1918, many failed to comply and were either fined or arrested. The Anti-Mask League was founded in January 1919 after the mask ordinance was ended, and then subsequently reinstated after a new wave of infections. Objections to masks included a belief in the lack of efficacy and a fear of governmental overreach. In February 1919, the ordinance was repealed and the Anti-Mask League disbanded. The use of the mask as a visible symbol of the ongoing crisis rather than simply a practical preventative measure can also be seen in the creation and promotion of masks for pets and mascots, at once absurd and poignant. You can see here in this image of the 5 women who are in Seattle that they have also made masks for their cats. I'm not sure that they actually believed that their pets would be protected, but I think that it was used as a sort of humorous allusion to the current conditions. In this image of the Pasadena baseball team, you can see that their mascot, the dog, is also wearing a mask. Although little photographic evidence of unique masks remains, textual evidence and illustrations suggest that there were attempts to personalize a garment that had such a significant visual impact, such as this whimsical skull and crossbones mask worn by an unknown Australian mask in a photograph from 1919. Unknown Australian man, rather, not mask. Even small parallels between 1918 and today indicate a common human response. In July 2020, beauty magazine Allure published an article entitled "Bold Eye Makeup Looks to Wear with Your Face Masks This Summer," echoing an article about the flu veil in 1918 that noted the beauty of the eyes is generally emphasized by such treatment of the veil. In spite of the passing of a century between the 1918 pandemic and today, the image of the mask and the rhetoric of the veil show our collective experience. As an essential interface in everyday life, clothing intimately relates to work and social customs, which have been dramatically affected by practices such as mask wearing, quarantine, working from home, and social distancing. In contrast to significant political and technological changes that have taken place over the last 100 years, human social behavior around masks shows common threads across time, revealing fashion's ability to act as a link to the past. Ultimately, the veil was a short-lived fad, superseded by the more common surgical mask. The mask, too, was discarded relatively quickly due to political pressures and a lack of understanding about the longevity of the virus, which returned in several waves over the next few years. Fundamentally, they mirror the way in which the deadly Spanish flu itself was treated not as a paradigm shift, but as a passing fashion. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions. You can also always reach out to me at my email address if you have any further things you want to discuss.
Thanks so much, Caroline. That was brilliant. Right, everyone. So we've got 15 minutes for questions now. I think, Ben, you're still with us, aren't you, at the moment? I can't seem to see hands that go up. So if you could identify any hands that go up, that would be great.
I will do, of course.
Thank you. Can I just start while people are thinking about it? Just by asking a question to each panelist. First of all, Caroline, what would you identify as the one lesson, maybe, or most important lesson that the history of the pandemic has to tell? You know, what for us now? What can we learn from it? That's what I'm trying to say.
I mean, one thing that I really noted at the time when I was doing my research is that it's easy to forget. And it's easy to move past things that do not fit with this kind of overall narrative of moving forward, of improving, of making the world better. And I think that that's something that you saw a lot in the way in which the pandemic was treated very soon after it ended in the early 1920s. This was a time when there was increased confidence in doctors and in the medical establishment, and that there was a great increase in many very important social health benefits. So the pandemic was counter to that narrative. And I think that I talked about fashion magazines, but the media in general at the time didn't want to emphasize it because it was something that was you know, against this philosophy of the new America. I mean, I think I'm mostly focusing on the United States, but I think that a lot of countries who were interested in the idea of technological innovation and improved medical practices at the time were having the same thing.
Thank you. Thank you. To Doris and Sara, you frightened the hell out of me with all those statistics, etc. But very interested in, you know, the solutions that you were proposing, and very interested in fashion forward as well. And I was just wondering what, you know, how you're positioning yourselves in terms of responding to, you know, the issues that you highlighted.
Well, as you mentioned, yeah, they are quite frightening statistics, since, I mean, unfortunately, the reality of these disposable plastic items, including these masks, is quite frightening in and of itself. So together at Fashion Forward, we're really looking at kind of the fashion system holistically, and also it's parallel and, you know, tied in the parts of the garment industry that are, of course, very much tied into not just fashion. So this is just one of our initiatives to kind of explore what is the current dialogue around this specific topic. So we are planning on doing more research on this and additional topics. But, you know, we are, again, approaching things from a very holistic perspective. So just to pitch, we actually do have an event that covers a slightly different topic this weekend. We are talking about expanding representation in the fashion system, so including models of different capabilities and features, and also thinking about social and racial justice in the system. But, you know, our opinion is that we can't take these different themes and subjects apart, because they're all so connected, right? So if we don't care about the social aspect of this situation, we're not going to care about the environmental aspect, and vice versa. So everything is a larger holistic system that we do need to look at and really kind of bring this information to the public in an accessible, free manner. And so our event on Sunday, if anyone is interested, please reach out. We will gladly send you the Zoom link. It's completely free, just a suggested donation.
Do you put it in the chat?
Oh, of course, yes. Yeah, and so again, this is just one of our initiatives. Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're looking at a total rethink of how we live and our values, aren't we? So interesting.
Yeah, this whole pandemic has definitely sparked, thank goodness, has sparked this type of conversation.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And to David, I was so relieved about your evidence that cloth masks really are doing a good job for us. And, you know, we can wash them as well. So that's all great. And I was really taken with your CPE idea rather than PPE, you know, that penny hadn't dropped with me. And I just wondered if you could make some comments about that, because if we start thinking about CPE, we start thinking about not just, you know, protecting self, but really the real job that these, or the vital job these masks are doing, which is protecting others around us and our communities. So I just wondered whether you had some thoughts on that, and how we can get that message out to people even more, really, or how it can have purchase with people.
Yes, I think it is the main rationale for wearing masks is that, you know, if everybody does it in social settings, then, you know, people who don't realize that they've got the virus and they're emitting it in their breathing, then it sort of lifts the community and helps to create an environment where we can trust ourselves to it. So yeah, it's, I think maybe we have gone in our hospital treatment too individualistic, you know, so, I mean, the face masks have got incredible specifications, but the justification for those specifications seems to me to be rather limited, because having got all those, you know, for example, there were so many hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of stuff that was imported by plane to this country, to the UK, and then it was deemed to be beyond, you know, it didn't meet the specifications. Now, I just wonder, it may not have met the specifications, but the amount of looseness that there is in the system anyway, with, you know, air getting through the gaps and breathing in aerosols that are not filtered, you know, we're trying to set standards which don't meet the need. And I suspect all that consignment would have probably done just as good as if it did have pass, because you know, as long as people wear these things and it limits the emissions coming out of their mouths and noses, then it's doing some good. Better to have something than nothing. And certainly, you know, looking at household textiles, cotton t-shirts cut up and turned into a mask. It's not going to be as perfect as one that you buy, but it does the job. And I think the problem is we just can't measure all the variables that are in the system. And if you try and measure things, you can always get the controls which give you a result, but is it a generalizable result? Those are problems. And I think, you know, it's like looking at are masks good? If you look out at the world of data, there's masses of data, you'll find some examples of masks that have, you know, adoption of masks, it saves lives. But other examples, adoption of masks, it doesn't make any difference. And so there are differences, of course, and we don't know what those are. These are uncontrolled experiments. So I think we need a sort of more of a community spirit in adopting things like washing hands and washing clothes even, and wearing masks in public spaces. All these things apply in a communal setting rather than just I'm protecting myself.
Yeah, and a global setting. And thank you for that. And all these issues apply to our thinking about sustainability and clothing as well.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Right. Any other any hands up then?
Yes, there are. So we have a couple of questions.
Could you signal to them? I just can't see those for some reason.
Katja, hello. Do you want to ask your question?
Hello. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Really interesting papers. My question is for Caroline, and I'm wondering if you've got any kind of insight into the relation of the veil as part of ordinary women's fashion at the time, to a much larger extent to obviously like the face mask is part of any fashion pre-pandemic in the current moment, and whether you would think that that people were more willing to accept perhaps the medical veil because it was already an established garment piece in everyday life, as opposed to the mask as we now know it in the current context.
I think that that's something that I had been pursuing as well in my research. I think that it's hard to say because the veil was I think that because there was also the mourning going on because of World War I in particular, they're selling a lot of mourning veils as well. So I think that there's a lot of overlap that it's hard to tease apart what's going on because of the pandemic, what's going on because of World War I. I mean, there's some articles in Women's Wear Daily which are, you know, typical, which is, well, the industry's doing terribly, but happily we're almost sold out of mourning goods because so many people are dead. So, you know, I mean, there's a and mourning and veils as well as being something that's selling very well. I think that it seems like the buying of veils, not so much these special veils, was relatively common at the time, and that people were, I think there was a belief that a regular veil would help in some way, and that it was a very popular trend. It had been throughout the World War I, and then it was into the mid 1920s. But I think that it's something that, I don't think that this hybrid, half medical, half fashion really worked, because I think that most of the women who were trying to avoid the medical look didn't want this sort of halfway house situation.
Thank you.
When I do see Liberty's got her hand up. My eyes seem to be working now. Liberty?
Hi. First of all, thank you very much. That was a really great talk from all of the speakers. I've got a bit of an open question, but I think I'd like Caroline to speak first. Do you think the fashion industry has a social or ethical responsibility to encourage and promote masks in the media as a safety tool and not just a fashion item?
That is a great question. I feel like the ethical responsibilities of the fashion industry is something that I mull over a lot. So I think that, and I'm sure the Fashion Forward group are thinking about that a lot as well. I think that it's hard to make people do things because it's good for the world. If you're the fashion industry, I think that, as we've seen from ethical fashion in general, people say they want to do it, but they don't. You know, people say, I want to buy organic, or but I think that they typically think about fashion with another element of themselves. And I think that fashion as a system and is not necessarily very well associated with like the ethical part of ourselves. I think that even people who believe that they're, being ethical, like buying, t-shirts that support important causes, might not always be thinking about the ethical ramifications of where those t-shirts came from, and that kind of thing. So I think that as far as masks in particular, I think that it would be great if fashion influenced people to wear masks, but I think that it wouldn't be, for me, because people are moved by ethical reasons. I think that they would be moved by a desire for either standing out or conforming, whichever one fits your version of fashion best.
So essentially you're saying if the fashion media encourage the masks to be a fashionable item, they will therefore be encouraging people to be more safe.
I think that that's fair. I think that they have to view it through a fashion lens to make an impact in that realm, because I think that, to me at least, in what I've seen, there's kind of people have very different motivations when thinking about how to dress themselves than in some other elements of their life.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. If I can, I'd also like to ask David a question. Do you believe that the mixed messages within the media in regard to the mask effectiveness and the lack of advisable mask standards has caused mask wearing within the population to be less effective?
I don't know that the public at large are aware of the standards. I think probably in hospitals they are, but I'm not sure that this having standards is something that the population as a whole would respond to. What I do think, though, is that we need to work generally at social responsibility, and one of my areas, I am interested in sustainability, but sustainability leading to a circular economy. where we don't have wastes. We have materials that can be turned into resources for another round of manufacturing. And that circular economy concept is something that I think is not something you can impose upon people. What people have to do is to see why we do things in a certain way and the benefits of it, and and sometimes it may mean contributing more. And I do support the idea of an extended producer responsibility tax on purchases, where that extended producer responsibility money doesn't just go into the general coffers, but goes into recycling and reuse of materials. And I think if we can create a culture where people care about the environment, care about the community, care about the next generation, then there won't be resistance to it. There won't be people fighting up and saying we won't wear masks under any situation. I think it will be a case of saying, well, I understand the issues and this is the way forward. And so people comply. People will take stuff to a textile bank for recycling. People will extend the life of products rather than buying things to throw away. And I think that there are things that we can do, but it's not at the level of trying to constrain people to say you've got to do things this way or that way.
Thank you, David. I'm sorry. Very quickly.
I was just going to add one quick thing is that, at Fashion Forward, we really think that sustainability in the way that it's understood right now is very limited. So when you say sustainability, people automatically think of the environmental effects, but really what we need to do is expand that conversation, which is what we're doing, into the social aspects as well. And so given that the fashion and garment industries impact so many millions of lives every day, billions if I may, we need to consider how these industries can be socially responsible, environmentally responsible, and it is essentially something that is a duty. So it's not even a question of what, it's a telling us that we need to, because as we've seen, even just with masks, there are severe environmental, social, humanitarian implications from masks. And the fashion industry is definitely a part of it. We can't separate the two just because my disposable mask doesn't look like a fashionable item. Everything is interconnected in this sense, and we have to address it all holistically.
That's a really, really good point to end on. Thank you. Wonderful conversation, discussion, lots of fantastic points made that I'm sure we'll be developing in discussion as the symposium goes on. So can we draw to a close there? We've got 5 minutes.